Welcome to the video demonstration series. In this video, we'll cover some new tools in 3Shaper V2. If you didn't make it to our quarterly technical webinar, here's what you may have missed. Let's jump right into 3Shaper. You'll notice when you launch the new 3Shaper V2, there is now 30 plus new tools added, and they've completely reorganized 3Shaper to make it a little easier to find your tools. So all your selection tools are in one place, your move tools, surface tools, edge tools, etc. Makes it much easier to find what you're looking for with all the new tools added. The first feature I want to talk about is importing. A lot of users have requested better importing of objects from other softwares. And one thing that helps with that is sometimes when we import an object, let's go ahead and import. I have a ring set up here. So this ring was created in 3Shaper, and then I exported it out to another sculpting software. And like most sculpting softwares, it remeshes your item to be able to sculpt in the other software. And when I bring it back into 3Shaper, we notice that there's some small holes where things didn't quite line up. What happens here, if I look in the box mode, there's nothing wrong with the mesh itself. The polygons are all intact. But sometimes your control points, your vertices, get superposed, which means they're on top of each other but not quite connected. So in the smooth mode, we see the little tears in the surfaces. So easy fix now is the new Connect Vertices tool. Before you would have to find these and connect them one at a time. You'd have to know where they are. The new Connect Vertices tools, as soon as I launch it, will go ahead and display all those bad connections. And with a simple click of this button here, Merge Vertices, it's going to fix those holes for us. Now, if I go back into 3Design, we see I have a solid object. It's ready to go. I could shape it further in Shaper, come back into 3Design, maybe add some pave or stones or whatever else I want to do to it. So great new improvement on importing. Speaking of sculpting, I want to talk about the new brush tool. Here's another model I've imported. It's an OBJ I found online. And you see it's already pretty well refined. And instead of having to go in and modify all the points and edges and faces by hand, simple way to maybe add some detail to this guy here is to use the new brush tool. It's located in the shaping section, and it's called brush. Simple enough. If I launch the brush tool, we see my cursor changes to this little purple icon. The icon shows the size of the brush as well as the brush shape. That little triangle shape you see. You can change your brush shapes from square to triangle, round, sharp, or smooth. Okay. You can also change the strength and radius of the brush. You can also change the radius with a shortcut. If you hold the Shift key and then scroll your mouse wheel, you can quickly change the brush size. So you can switch back and forth without having to go over to properties. So I've set this head up with some symmetry, so I'm going to work on the left half and it'll automatically mirror over. And you can see I can brush in some details by just running over the refined mesh. So maybe we'll add some ridges to his head, make him a little more alien. So that's just the standard brush mode, which is push and pull. Okay. If you want to push instead of pull, hold the control key. You see the icon changes. You can push into the mesh instead of pulling out. Okay. The other modes we have is smudge. Okay. Smudge automatically switches the tool to smooth. Again, we can change the size of the brush. And with smudge, you can kind of just smudge around the mesh. Instead of pulling or pushing it, you can kind of do a little bit more subtle shaping of the objects. Like so. The third mode is grab. With the grab mode, you can pull on the surface. So especially great if you're trying to kind of modify large areas. You're not trying to add ridges or textures or anything. You just want to kind of maybe make his nose wider. He needs a little bit of a nose job. You can just grab those parts and move it. He looks a little sad. Maybe we'll give him a bit more of a smile. So you can quickly, completely add and change details to your model with the new brush tool. With this file, we're going to take a look at selection tools, symmetry, and colors. Start with the selection tools. There's 4 new tools I want to point out. We have the regular selection you're used to. Right next to that is the new paint selection. With that one activated, you can actually just run your mouse over faces and select them really quickly. This works in faces, edges, and vertices. The shortcuts, the keyboard shortcuts for that, if you have a selection and you want to add to that selection, hold Shift, and then you can paint further selections. If you want to remove a part from that, hold Control, paint over that, takes it away from the selection. So Shift to add, Control to subtract from the selection. We also have Extend and collapse selection. This works in all 3 modes as well. Extend just extends the area of the selection. It grows the selection out. You can also collapse the selection and bring it in smaller. So grow, collapse. Makes it really fast when you have a really refined shape and you want to select big patches of areas. And finally, this one only works in face mode. Face loop, if we have a face selected and click on face loop, we can now use these little red arrows to extend the selection in those 4 directions. The small single arrows just extends it one at a time in either direction. The double arrows will extend it all the way around the object in either direction. So all those tools make selecting much faster and easier in V2. Okay. You'll notice my fish, I've already cut it in half. It's all set up for symmetry. I've deleted half the faces, aligned all the vertices right in the center. So we'll go ahead and take a look at symmetry real quick. Works very similar to the way it worked in V1. It's pretty much the same. You're going to exit out of the edit tools into the submenu. This is where we find our symmetry and construction tools. These are all parametric parameters we can add to our objects. So in this case, I'm going to use a regular symmetry. You'll also notice we now have circular and matrix duplications as well. We'll do a mirror on this one. Automatically picks the most appropriate plane. You may have to do that manually sometimes. And in the options, we'll go ahead and weld it so that our seam in the center is welded so this becomes a solid object as we're working on it. Validate, and now we have the other half of the fish. Now, if you jump into the edit tools here, it's going to add a new surface and lose that symmetry. If you want to edit this with the symmetry on, what you want to do is go in your history, find the model you're working on, expand it. Here's that mirror that we added. Underneath that is the original surface. Anything above this will stay parametric, so I can edit this surface by double clicking it, make my changes to my object, and it will stay symmetrical on the other side. Okay, another cool trick in V2, if you move a point away from the center, obviously the seam gets split. Now, to get it back to the center, it automatically snaps to the symmetry plane. So, small little improvement, but makes things way easier if you're trying to keep your center seam welded nice and clean. Okay. Finally, with this file, I want to show you how you can add colors so we can color code parts of our object. Works in face mode, and there's 2 ways we can color code. We can make our selections first. I'll do a paint selection here. Let's say I want to work on, oops. So I want to work on this eye section here. I can give that a color by clicking the create a new color group in the color tab. That adds a red color. It's pretty random what color it adds. You can right click and rename or change the color. So if you want to choose something else. When you deselect, you'll see that the eye is now selected or colored in a new color. Okay. Maybe his eyeball, we want a different color. I'll use the double click and select the entire, make sure I'm on the right tool. Select the entire eye. And another way we can add color instead of adding it here and then dragging it onto the selection is if you right click the selection, you can add or change the color right here. So we hit add color and we'll choose the color we want. Quickly change the color. Now the nice thing about colors, we're going to be able to use them with parametric tools a little bit later. But it also makes it nice if you want to work on a detail and maybe hide the rest of the fish. So I'll use the new show, hide, and freeze buttons here. You can quickly freeze parts, hide other parts, etc. The buttons at the top will freeze, hide, or show the entire groups. So for example, I want to hide the white body and the red eyeball so that I can just make adjustments or selections on the eye. Okay, might want to freeze the body so I can see that I am still affecting it, but I can't accidentally select the rest of the fish, just the part that's showing. In this file, we have a simple signet ring that we've created a surface around to match the contours. We're going to use that surface to kind of rebuild this part of the ring. And to do that, first I'll go ahead and finish hiding my signet. And then we'll go back in and double click that edit surface to work on our 3Shaper surface. Okay. The first thing I want to do is talk about attributes. Attributes are a lot like colors, where we can assign attributes to parts of the model. We can assign those to vertices, edges, and faces. I'm going to assign them to edges. I'm going to go ahead and do a select all and select all the edges here. And then here in our colors and attributes section, we have a create and assign attributes button. So this allows us to create the attribute on those edges. So we'll hit the plus to add an attribute, and we can either do that by a tag or a numerical value. So the tag allows me to rename this attribute to whatever I want. I'm going to call it edges and click there. So if I deselect that and now use this other button here, select by attributes, brings up a selection menu for all the attributes I've assigned, and I can select those edges really easily. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and refine this model just one time. So as you know, refine doubles the number of faces and edges, etc. And then I'll go to my attribute selection, and you can see I can now select just those edges that I assigned the name to. Okay, next I'm going to go ahead and chamfer those edges. I'm going to chamfer them with a 0.5 millimeter length, that's the default, but I'm also going to add a bevel. When I validate, we get these nice little squares, the little chamfer, and the bevel creates the triangular portions. So we get this nice pattern. If I select faces, because that selection was already activated, it's going to automatically select all the faces except for the new chamfered area. Go ahead and take this opportunity to add a color to that in case I need to reselect it again later. Drop that green group on there. There we go. Right. And I want to get rid of the white section, so I'm going to do an inverse selection. That's the reverse the selection. And we'll just delete those faces. So we get this nice cage pattern. That's exactly what we were going for. If we go ahead and now create a thickness, we can do that here with the shell tool. That just allows us to choose how thick we want the piece to be. Validate. Oops. Helps if I select them all first. Shell. Validate. And we can see we can add a thickness to that surface. So that's pretty good. But let's make this a little more parametric and also use some other features. So we'll undo that. Go ahead and hit the exit or the reach history tools. In our history tools, we'll take a look at one of the new history functions we have. And that's called smooth extrude. Smooth extrude is going to extrude all the faces. And we can use a shell mode or a flange or split colors if we had this color code in different parts. We want to shell. We want to shell the whole thing. And we'll choose our thickness. I'll do 3/4 of a millimeter. And it will also add a fillet. So 0.3 is the default. It's going to round off the corners just like a normal fillet in the CAD side of things works. And we validate. We get this nice extrusion with little filleted edges, much nicer object. And it's parametric. So just like in the symmetry, if we go underneath this model back to that edit surface we were working on, double click it, we can go in and make any changes we need to our piece. Do a paint selection here all the way across this top edge. Maybe do a little alignment. So brings that edge up flat. Now you'll notice when I exit out of the editor, that change takes effect, and anything on top of it, so our symmetries, or in this case our smooth extrude, we still have that 0.75 with the filleted edges. In this file, we're going to talk about some improvements to existing tools, namely the extrude tool. We can extrude edges. Let me go into our model here. And we see we have this little snake head that's been pre-made in Shaper. And we've got an open end here. We want to extrude that out into the rest of this model. And to do that, we will select this border edge. And we can do a extrusion, just like before. Okay, in extrusion, we can force sharpness on both the front and back side of the extrusion, as well as choose the number of subdivisions as we extrude. So that's the regular extrusion. We now have a new advanced extrusion tool. This is going to allow me to extrude along support objects, namely other objects, planes, or even curves. I have a curve pre-drawn here. This is a regular 2D sketch curve. And what I'll do is I'll launch advanced extrusion. And for the type of extrusion, you see a bunch of new options here. We're going to change the extrusion mode so we can do it around an axis. Oops. By selecting this little arrow here. And you see the extrusion is following around a circle around the axis that's chosen. Or we can do along a curve. And then we'll go ahead and select the curve, and you'll see the extrusion follows the curve. Now you'll want to change the number of subdivisions so you can match the curve a little more precisely. So once we have enough subdivisions here, you can see that we're now following that shape. Okay, so a few other options in here. You can change the end types from merge to split. We can do a connected or split on the pocket mode. We'll see a few of those a little bit later. We can also join to the curve, just going to move the extrusion so that it fits perfectly on the curve and now just follows the definition of the curve. You can also trim the curve. So if at this point you decide you didn't want to go all the way to the end of the curve, you can trim it right here inside the tool. So the question next would be, now if I change that curve, will this update? And the answer is no, it will not. This is not a parametric tool, so if I change the curve, the 3Shaper object doesn't change. But we do have a parametric tool to do that instead. So let me go ahead and step this back where we were. And to do that, we need to assign an attribute to this edge. So we'll go ahead and create an attribute. We're going to go ahead and create a tag, and I'll call this edge. And then we're going to go ahead and exit out of the edit tools into the sub menu. And we'll do our extrusion here using the extrude parametric construction tool. So when I select on that, again, we get a bunch of different modes. In this case, I'm going to do along a curve. The element type is going to be an edge, since that's what I have assigned here. And we choose the edge attribute, the one that I assigned. It's the only one, so it's defaulted here. Okay. We go ahead and select the curve to follow. And we see a little bit of a preview of what's going to happen. It's a little red line. Again, we'll want to subdivide it further. Let me do 20 sections there, so we get a nice smooth extrusion following the curve. So go ahead and validate. That'll create the extrusion. And we get to the same place we were before, but the nice thing is, because we've added this extrusion parametrically to our tree, if we go ahead and exit out and we decide we want to adjust our curve, just double click back into the sketch curve, make some changes, and simply recompute. So very powerful. You can add some parametric properties to your shaper objects. Finally, I want to show you a couple more improvements to the extrusion tool as well as the bridge tool. So for this ring, we've set up the snake head around a typical ring size. We've positioned them over to the left a little bit. And what we'll do is go ahead and exit the editing tools, and we'll do a symmetry. I'm going to use the new symmetry instead of having to mirror this twice and get rid of one. What you can do is a circular duplication. This will create the symmetry around an axis. I just need 2 copies, one for the left side, one for the right side. Okay. I don't want to use the parametric properties of this. I want to be able to attach these two together. So I'm going to go ahead and reach modeling tools. It's going to add another edit surface on top of that and keep these as separate objects. Now what I want to do is bridge the 2 open areas together. So I'll go ahead and select the borders on both ends, and then we'll bridge those together. Now in version 1, the bridge does the standard straight across bridge. We can now add subdivisions. And we see, well, that's not quite what I'm going for. There's 3 other modes now. Curved mode is going to give us 2 tension curves that we can use to create our bridge. Again, the way these are lined up, that doesn't quite work. We can go around an axis. So almost there. This is going to bridge it and then spin around a center axis. Again, not quite lined up for that. So what we'll do instead is along a curve. So we'll choose the curve to follow, which will be our ring size, and it's going to bridge those 2 sections following our curve outline. Okay. This can also be done in the construction tools, so it'll be parametric to the curve. Great little trick for making rings. Now we've got a nice texture on his head. Let's add that texture to the rest of his body. So we'll go ahead and use our selection tool, the face loop, and we'll just grow the selection to the parts that we want to extrude out. So we'll get that row selected and then select all the way around to the other side. Alright, looks good on that end. Let's go back around there a couple more times. Looks good. Now here's where I'll go ahead and create a color group and drop that on there just in case I need to reselect just those sections. We can do so by clicking there. And we'll do the extrusion. So like I said, that improvement to the extrusion, we have pocket mode now, where we can do a regular connected extrusion. So this will all extrude out as one face, or we can split it. And in this case, we want to split it. This will create a nice texture on each one of those faces. So we can just pull on the arrow and extrude it, or we can use the ruler. That'll give me the option to type in the exact amount that I want to extrude. Okay, so let's go 0.15. And you can see that it's extruding each one of those faces into a separate piece. Great quick way of doing textures. Let me unselect that so you can see. And there's our finished ring.